Hi, everyone. Welcome to this event from first generation student to first generation professional. I'd like to welcome you. We're going to give you just a couple of seconds to join this event, and then we're going to kick it off with our phenomenal speaker, Bernice Maldonado. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm Louise Jackson. I'm with the Alumni Career Program at the Alumni Association here at the University of Michigan. Really grateful to have you joining this session. So those participant numbers are trickling up. We've got 33 on the call. So I'm going to quickly cover some housekeeping before I hand things off to Bernice. Just a heads up to everyone on this session, we are going to be recording the session. We will send that recording as well as some follow-up resources to you in a follow-up email. So please look out for that recording from us here at the Alumni Career Program. Without further ado, I'll just share a little bit about who I am and then kick off and share some more about Bernice. So again, I'm Louise Jackson. I am the director of the Alumni Career and Education Programs here at the Alumni Association at the University of Michigan. And we're really excited to be addressing the topic today on first generation students. We know, and that transition not only from student, but from student to first generation professional. We know that at the University of Michigan, there are a number of phenomenal resources, scholarships, and programs at the university to support our first generation students. However, we really are interested in that transition from student to professional. So we're very excited to host Bernice Maldonado with us today. Bernice is a phenomenal expertise in the space of first generation professionals. So Bernice, thank you so much for joining us for this session.
Yes, thank you for inviting me, Louise. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. So without further ado, I'm going to share a little bit about Bernice and her background, and then also share a little bit about two panelists that we have on the line with us, Shannon Janko and another one of our alumni or soon-to-be alumni, Brandon Valdez, and a little bit more about their experience as first-generation students and professionals. So more about Bernice. Bernice was a first-generation college student, and she didn't have a roadmap on how to transition from her working class roots to professional workplaces. Without mentors, role models, or career guidance, she had to use her curiosity and her grit to make it to corporate America. Bernice is now a strategy consultant and advisor with expertise in working with first-generation professionals from working class backgrounds. She's the CEO and principal consultant of Catalyst Era, a Los Angeles-based strategy consulting firm that's dedicated to inclusive change and talent development. She's also founded the First Gen Talent to research the socioeconomic class impacts on career mobility and provide data-driven insights to drive inclusive change in the workplace. Bernice now combines her lived experience, consulting expertise, and research to provide strategies and insights on what it really takes to successfully break the class ceiling. So Bernice, you come with a wealth of expertise. Again, I've always looked at you from the get-go when I first met you as someone really leading the charge related to not only research on first generation students, but first generation professionals. Awesome. And I'll quickly share a little bit about Brandon as well as Shannon, who are on the line and going to be jumping on for our QA portion when we get to that section. So Shannon is a two-time first-generation University of Michigan alum. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology, as well as in women and gender studies in 2019, and then went on to receive her Master of Public Health and Master of Social Work in December of 2021. Since then, she's been working for the University of Washington's Department of Anesthesiology and Pain Medicine as a community engagement research coordinator, and her primary role is working in King County with community leaders to better understand the ways to improve relationships between community and research. So you can't see Shannon, but she's available and she's going to be chatting with us when we get to that portion. So Shannon, thanks for joining us. And then a little bit about Brandon as well. So Brandon is a first-gen professional currently finalizing his Master's of Accounting degree at the University of Michigan with a graduation in 2023, April 23. Brandon has his bachelor's degree in accounting from Cal State Fullerton and has worked in accounting for various different firms, including Noble Aerospace, CLA, Greenwave Systems. He recently accepted a position at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Brandon was born and raised in Southern California. So I think a little connection point as well with Bernice from that part of the world. So Bernice, I'm going to hand it over to you. Please take it away and lead our session.
Sure. Thank you so much, Louise, and welcome everyone that's here on the webinar today. I'm super excited to be here today. I love talking about this, and you're going to see me looking down a few times because I can talk about this topic for days. So I want to make sure I don't go over on my time, but welcome again to navigating the transition from first-gen student to first-gen professional. So again, Louise covered what kind of the overarching topic today, but essentially just wanted to cover again, navigating the transition. So first-gen students and professionals are trailblazers, forging into workplaces that might be very different from those experienced by their family or loved ones, which many of you might, be very well aware of. And while for some the experience might be supportive, for others the transition might seem insurmountable and can be fraught with complexities as professional and personal worlds collide and sometimes contradict. So today we're going to talk about some of the key findings from the research that we completed just a couple of years ago on the first-gen workplace experience. Also, as Louise mentioned, to have a supportive conversation with others who have experienced this transition firsthand. And I'll also give some tips and insights into understanding whether your current organization or maybe an organization you want to pursue a job at has an inclusive culture. So with that said, I wanted to first start off by kind of sharing my starting point. So many of you might be familiar with this, but my starting point is I came from a low income, poor family, lower class family. Parents' education, my mom had zero education. She never had an opportunity to go to school at all because she was an orphan. And my dad had about 7th grade education, and both of them were factory workers. So that was my starting point. And so starting points are important because in social research, this is known as class origin. So class origin is essentially a person's socioeconomic starting point. And so this is gauged by families' income during their early years, usually around preteen or around teenage years, around the age of 14, for example. Your parents' level of education and what your parents' occupations were when you were growing up. And so class origin and first generation professionals, or FGPs, is essentially, I believe that a person's starting point impacts a person's social and career mobility, right? Even if they go on to get a higher education and move into a higher socioeconomic status. So actually this became very, very interesting to me because I started looking back at my career and started wondering, just reflecting back on certain things that have happened. And also the fact that while I was in different corporations, I never once shared my personal background or my personal experiences, because there was many times where I felt that if I shared my working class background, people would judge me or they wouldn't think that I was good enough to be in those environments. So that's when I started getting curious and wanted to do more research around that. And so essentially we have been using the term first generation professionals. So first generation students is much more known. However, first generation professionals is a somewhat a newer term. And we define it broadly by saying it's a person who is a white collar professional from a working class background. And so why this is important, it's because, as I mentioned earlier, our starting point can impact our personal and professional experiences. And so how class origin impacts your capital. So there's an intersection with where you started from and the impact to certain capital that you have, right? So one of the more important capitals, of course, is economic. So a person's access to financial resources. Then there's cultural, a person's knowledge of the unwritten rules. And then there's social, a person's social networks and relationships. So depending on your background, and if you go into a professional workplace, when it comes to economic capital, you probably might lack a safety net to invest in your career and take more risks. So for example, you may not have enough money to pay for, say, a coach, a job coach or a career coach, things of that nature. If you're helping extended family financially, and perhaps you get an opportunity, a promotional opportunity in another state or another, or even across the world, maybe you can't really take that opportunity because, you're supporting other family members, or, you just need to stay close to your family. So you're not able to take those risks. Now, when it comes to cultural capital, that again is not knowing the unwritten rules of the workplace. So again, this could really affect your performance if you're not kind of demonstrating certain behaviors or cultural norms that are preferred in an organization. So not knowing those unwritten rules can affect your career mobility. And then when it comes to social, of course, not having professional networks to open doors. I know for a lot of my career, the initial jobs I got were because I applied for them and then I interviewed and went on. But later on, as I started building my network, started getting mentors and sponsors, it started becoming more of opportunities started coming to me through those individuals. So again, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there's research lacking in this area. So there's very little research on how a person's starting point or social origin impacts their workplace experience. But I fully believe that having more data around this topic can drive change. So that's really my whole purpose and goal behind the research that we're doing. The other thing too to note is that there aren't, like I already mentioned, there isn't a lot of good data. So the only data I was able to find about the number of first generation professionals was the last number I saw was 13 million college graduate professionals that are believed to be working class. But note that this came from a book called Blue Collar Roots, White Collar Dreams, which was written back in 2010. So other than that, I haven't been able to see any estimates around the number of first generation professionals. But it's important to understand that tomorrow's American workforce is going to be very different with a lot more first-gen professionals, because several universities and schools are reporting up to 56% of their undergraduates are from homes where neither parent have a bachelor's degree. So that's super important to note. And that's something that I like to share with organizations, because if they're going to want to hire this high potential talent, they really need to start looking at their current organizational practices. And with that said, some of the studies that we have come across have reported that up to 97% of individuals from working class backgrounds reported that their social class background affected their work experience. And with that said, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the research that we did and some of the key findings on our research to understand the first generation professional experience. So there was 3 key findings. Number 1 is that structured programs and employee groups are important career stepping stones. Number 2 was that professional workplace behavior and communication styles can alienate first generation professionals. And third is that first generation professionals feel less included in the workplace, but their managers can make a difference. When it comes to structured programs, when we compared non-first gen professionals to first gen professionals were 3 times more likely to obtain their first professional job through a work study program. So if you're not familiar with the work study program, you essentially have a job through your school, but the government pays or subsidizes some of the pay for that job. So it might be an on-campus job, or it may be an off-campus job. First-gen professionals were also 2 times more likely to find employee resource groups and professional groups helpful. And third, first-gens were also 3 times more likely to source mentors versus professional groups. So structured programs for first-gens are very, very important. When it comes to communications, first-gen professionals reported high rates of code switching, both at work and with family. So essentially code switching, if you're not familiar with the term, is when you change the way you speak, the way you behave, your mannerisms, everything to fit into a more dominant culture. And so sometimes people report code switching right while at work, or even with their families as well. Also, 43% of first gens wish they had learned more professional communication skills earlier in their career. When it comes to inclusion, we gave a Likert 5-point scale, and first-gen professionals consistently gave lower scores on questions around whether their personality type is valued, whether they have access to decision makers, whether they feel comfortable talking about their family and personal life, kind of what I mentioned about myself earlier, and that my unique skills are valued and utilized. So across these dimensions, they consistently had lower scores in these areas. And so we find this to be very, very interesting and also very impactful because it can impact the retention and retainment of first-gen professionals in the workplace. So ways to identify a class-inclusive place. So I'm going to cover some tips to understand whether an organization's culture is first-gen inclusive. So this wheel shows kind of the whole employee life cycle, right? From recruitment all the way to retention. And so at the recruitment stage, a first-gen inclusive culture, that organization, it will be recruiting from schools and organizations that have diverse members or membership, and they hire for culture add. So what I mean by this statement is that they won't just hire from certain schools, but they'll make sure to hire from a lot of different schools, whether it's state schools, whether it's historically Black universities, just a number of different diverse types of organizations. And along with that, the organizations may also be organizations like SHIP, which is a Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers. I think that's the acronym, or other types of professional associations that cater to diverse members, right? And they also hire for culture add. So instead of trying to hire to maintain a certain cultural behaviors, they're looking for unique backgrounds and experiences that will add to their existing culture, right? Instead of just doing culture fit hiring. When it comes to onboarding, they're going to proactively use channels to make sure that all employees are aware of all of their programs and resources that are available to them, right? When it comes to keeping employees engaged, they're going to practice inclusive communications and make sure that they're enabling and rewarding both independent and interdependent behaviors. So why that's important is because a lot of professional environments tend to be very independent driven. So, all about the person themselves, what did they achieve on their own, very independent work. Whereas a lot of first gens tend to come from very interdependent or team kind of culture backgrounds, or like some family-based cultures. And so if a organization rewards both type of, independent and interdependent behaviors, then that will tend to be more of an inclusive culture. Then when it comes to development, making sure that the organization shares what their cultural norms are for success. So the unwritten rules, right? So they're upfront about what those unwritten rules are. Or maybe they provide mentors, a mentoring program that could give those insider kind of information. They also provide feedback and offer training on key skills like communications that we mentioned earlier. They also routinely conduct workplace culture assessments, and they actually act on the feedback that they get from employees, right? They don't just do these surveys and you never hear back from them, that they're actually taking action on opportunities for improvement, especially around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, providing ongoing support for employees. Some additional questions to assess class diversity inclusiveness is by simply looking at the leadership teams and seeing whether the leaders or even their board members are diverse themselves, right? When it comes to culture fit, like I mentioned earlier, are employees penalized for interdependent behaviors, or are they, is independent behaviors preferred over interdependent, right? When it comes to off-hour events, are employees expected to take part in off-hour events? So this can be, and I know we're, a lot of us are working remote now, but when it comes to events, right, is that kind of like a cultural thing to do? Because some people may be very, want to be home with their families, they're close with their family, or they're even helping out other family members, with caregiving or things of that nature. So if you have a culture where everyone's expected to hang out after work or whatever that may be not as accommodating for certain individuals. When it comes to learning and training, does the company make sure that there are development opportunities that are offered to all employees, right? And not just certain employees that are considered, maybe more elite groups or teams within the company. When it comes to job expenses, are employees expected to pay for expenses up front and be reimbursed later? Because this could financially be impactful to certain individuals who maybe are helping out extended family members and things of that nature. Then last but not least, language. So our terms and language used for a specific class. And what I mean by that is if there's a leader talking to a group of people, references or examples that are being used, are they specific to a certain class, right? So for example, if there's a leader or a manager who's talking to a group of people and says, you know, remember that time when you used to spend your summers vacationing with the family? Well, for some people that may not resonate because even in my case, we never took vacations. We didn't have money to take vacations. We didn't leave the city we lived in, right? So I can't, like, that doesn't resonate with me. So I really, you know, so just making sure that the types of discussions or examples that you're using resonate with different backgrounds. So let's move on to which actions can improve success for your personal and professional experience. So number one, what I always tell first gens is to recognize your value, because I just feel that the ability to move from working class to now professional to, you know, higher education and now a professional is a massive accomplishment. And I always feel like I have to remind first gens, because a lot of first gens I talk to tend to downplay or not think that this is really much of an accomplishment. And I'm guilty of that too, right? That was just my situation. I knew I had to go to college. I knew I had to become a professional, but we tend to downplay sometimes our accomplishments. So number one is always recognize your value. So improving your social confidence can improve your social mobility as well, and ability to get opportunities. So you can do this by identifying experiences and events that have shaped your strengths and being realistic and honest about what you've achieved, right? Secondly is to get clear about your superpowers. And this is a matter of self-reflection, self-assessment. So there's a number of self-assessments you can take, periodic brainstormings to see what you've learned up to this point, what new skills you've acquired, things of that nature. If you've heard of a role tree, it's essentially taking each of your roles, whether it's a volunteer role, a paid role, and looking at all the skills that you use in that role and just creating a list of all of your top skills. Also continuously getting feedback from different people just to see, you know, because how you see yourself may be very different from how others see you as well, or how others see your strengths and abilities. And then also what types of recognition do you get, right? So are you consistently recognized for a certain thing, right? One example could be, I know I was always given praise or compliments on my PowerPoint presentations, right? And little did I know that that would be one of my doors to becoming an internal consultant to executives within the company. So things of that nature is really reflecting on what you do really well and what people compliment you on all the time. So again, this will help you also determine what's your most recent proven success. So what can you say you have a proven skill in? You can, you know, what are you an expert in, right? So you could tell people I'm an expert in designing PowerPoints, which to some it might not seem like a big thing, but that's a huge communication skill that a lot of companies need, right? And then that you enjoy using it. So it's great to be good at certain things, but also being clear on what you actually enjoy doing as well. That's an extra added benefit, right? In our ultimate goal. And then make sure to share your unique perspectives, whether it's with employee resource groups, if your organization has it, on LinkedIn, whether it's on LinkedIn yourself, through your profile, or through other groups that are within LinkedIn. If you're a member of a professional association or any other industry and special interest groups, right? Because your perspective and your experience is very unique, and just helping other people understand some of the different, you know, paths that we all come from. And also consider, you know, leadership or committee roles if you haven't done that, which will help also influence change by influencing people through understanding different perspectives, right? So with that said, one of the key and most important things I always advise first gens on is to grow your support network, not just your network, but also your support network, because when it comes to your network, as many of you know already, that almost 80% of jobs, today's jobs are filled through networks. As I mentioned earlier, when I first started early in my career, I was applying and, you know, doing that kind of thing. But as I got more experience and grew my network, I no longer was applying, the opportunities were coming to me through my network. So it's super, super important to really grow that support network and let them know, what you enjoy, what you're passionate about, what you think you're an expert in, those kind of things. And I would advise to do that by mapping out your current network, identifying what your relationship is to them. So what I mean by that is this a person that you know very well? They know you very well. They know your skills. They know your interests. Is it a secondary person that kind of knows you, but maybe you can get to know them a little bit better, or someone that you would like to know? You could also map out people that you want to get to know as well. And then create a network action plan. So what's your plan to either change that relationship or improve that relationship with that person? And last but not least, I always encourage to use LinkedIn. LinkedIn is not spelled correctly here, but use LinkedIn to grow your network. And I could give tips on LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn is an awesome tool that is underutilized. And as part of the resources that we'll give after today's session, I'll give some tips on LinkedIn on how to use it to grow your network. The other thing I also want to make sure to let this group know about is to talk about your marketable skills, right? So communications is one of the skills that most employers say that their employees lack, but also is the most in demand, right? So really making sure that you communicate well, but more importantly, also that you communicate well about yourself. So taking courses to improve your communication skills, and again, updating your resume and LinkedIn profile to reflect that as well. And practice speaking about yourself, of course. That is one thing, I'm glad I forgot about this bullet point, but that is one thing that I have working with first gen students and professionals. I have noticed that they definitely can improve speaking about themselves, and not that it's more of again, like I mentioned earlier, they don't think that what they've done to date is an accomplishment, or they don't find it to be something to, that is noteworthy or important. But I really want to emphasize to practice speaking about your accomplishments and your strengths and your skills, and do not downplay any of that when you're talking to people about yourself. Last thing I do want to touch on is we are doing a phase 2 of our research this year, probably mid-year or so, where we're going to explore career mobility. So our goal is to understand how socioeconomic class background impacts the career mobility of professionals. So how does someone's starting point impact their ability to move up in a company? And so I encourage you to join us in supporting our research. We're looking for professionals from all backgrounds, both first gens and non-first gens. We're opening it up to everyone because this is a comparative analysis and a comparative study, which will probably launch in the spring or so, or maybe a little bit in the summer, but we definitely would appreciate your participation, but also sharing it with your networks as well. So I just wanted to end with that. And if you have any other questions or comments, or even want to LinkedIn with me on LinkedIn, feel free to do so. But feel free to email us at info@firstgentalent.org. You can also visit us, our website, and learn more about our research at firstgentalent.org. And you can get involved as well with our research, as I mentioned earlier. So I hope I didn't, yes, I did not go over time. So yes, so thank you so much, Louise.
Thank you so much, Bernice. So now we're gonna actually have Shannon and Brandon join us for more of a community conversation and Q&A portion. So Shannon and Brandon, feel free to turn those webcams on, and we're gonna get you started here for the conversation. While we're getting Brandon and Shannon on the line, there we go. There's Shannon. Hi, Shannon. And Brandon will be joining us. We'll kick off some of the questions that we've received. We've got some really insightful questions from our alumni, from the registration, as well as coming in live through the chat. So while we have Shannon and Brandon joining us, Shannon, maybe we'll start with you since you're there and you're available. Can you share a little bit about your story and your experience as a first-gen professional? We know that you were involved with some of the programs here on campus at the University of Michigan. So we'd love to just get to know you a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me today. I've really appreciated this panel and hearing from Bernice. So I can share a little about my story. So I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. And I was a first gen student who went to the University of Michigan for both my undergrad and graduate degrees. During my time as an undergraduate, I was part of a program, as Luis mentioned, called the Kessler Scholars Program. So this is a scholarship program that provides both financial and community support. So they're really focused on trying to help particularly first gen students build connections and fill in some of those gaps in resources and knowledge that often come with being first gen. So being part of that program was a really helpful experience for me to, you know, uh, learn things about career building. We had alumni come and speak about their experiences, and there was just general support from the mentorship in the program. Yeah, so happy to be here and happy to share more as we go along today.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Really appreciate that. And I do know, if for those of you who are not aware, Kessler Scholars here at the University of Michigan is a phenomenal scholarship for first gen students. And again, as you've made this transition from first gen student to then first gen professional. So maybe it's a good opportunity then to move along to Brandon. So Brandon, I know, you recently underwent your experience just considering job offers and just as a first gen, student and moving into first gen professional, what that experience was like. We'd just like to learn a little bit more about how you navigated that and what you learned from your experience.
Definitely. Well, I'm very thankful for the opportunity to be here today. It's opportunities like these that led me to apply and eventually enroll in the University of Michigan. And that's not exactly how I started, though. I started in Southern California, where I was born and raised. And I went to a state school there where I did my bachelor's in accounting. And after some years, I started working in the professional environment as an accountant in different firms. And I quickly realized there was a lot of learning needed to take place in this transition. There were certain conversations that I should have probably had with different people that I didn't have at that time. And eventually, when I was deciding what to do next after this master's program that I'm in now, I was thankful to have some time with Louise, who was definitely a mentor and a guide as to not only negotiating salary and different the different aspects of the offer I received in my job, but it also led me to some critical realizations as far as some of the things Bernice mentioned related to knowing my value, knowing what I want in my career, and even reaching out to certain individuals and groups that would facilitate me in as a first generation professional in advancing in my career in an effective and efficient way. So these conversations with different companies are not easy to have. I quickly realized that, but I appreciated the connections I made that enabled me and gave me the confidence to have these kind of conversations and to ask these kind of questions as far as what do you offer first generation professionals? What kind of networking opportunities are there? What kind of what kind of connections can I make within this organization that will further propel me in my career? And it was through these kind of conversations, through this kind of learning and conversations I had with different people that ultimately not only led me to decide on the company I'm going to with PricewaterhouseCoopers, but also even long-term. I now have a long-term view towards not knowing my value, knowing what I want, and even being able to facilitate and help those that are approaching similar stages in their career.
100%. I just love, there's so many threads I'd like to pull from your comments, Brandon, whether it's, reflecting on how that correlates to what Bernice mentioned about really knowing your worth and really being confident to be able to go into those conversations and respectfully advocate for that worth, right? And that can feel somewhat uncomfortable, but kind of leaning into that discomfort, so to speak. And that's something that I'm very passionate about for first gen professionals and for our alumni. So Bernice, I'm not sure if there's anything you want to add to some of the pieces that Shannon and Brandon mentioned.
No, I definitely think it's important for first gens to be comfortable, just anyone, right, to be comfortable with their value and their strengths and the skills and even what their background and experiences has helped them with. I know for myself, one of my first jobs was working in a bank, and I ended up getting a supervisor position like at the age of 17 because I shared with the hiring manager that I grew up helping my mom, translate, help her, interact with the customer, with the bank tellers and the representatives. And so I would help explain to my mom in Spanish, some of the bank products. And then they ended up hiring me as a supervisor for a financial literacy program that they wanted to start. So you never know what opportunities are out there with your background and where you can really lend some of your experience as well. I mean, that was one of the most awesome jobs I had because I was combining my personal experience. I was combining I like helping people. I was combining financial literacy. So it's just, really identifying your skills, what you're passionate about, and what your life experience has given you as well from a skill and value perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, I think I love that, really just advocating for your worth and really feeling confident about that versus feeling like, I got to keep that, that side of my maybe personal experience somewhat separate and not share it versus valuing it and feeling comfortable to share it. And again, hopefully for organizations that are receptive and welcoming of that kind of shared experience. So that, again, that's something that we're advocating for our alumni to really understand how they can evaluate those organizations. Again, to the point Brandon made, what kind of questions are we asking so we can understand the organizations we're applying for? So, again, really love all of that insight. So one of our alum asked a question about navigating promotion. So, we've talked a little bit about job search and how to ask those questions in an interview stage, or maybe even as you're selecting organizations. What about promotion? And as someone, how does a first-gen professional advocate for themselves? Are we talking about mentorship, sponsors? I just love your thoughts, Bernice. I know that this is something maybe you have pieces to add here.
Yes, definitely. One of the things with any job that you have is getting very clear with your manager as to what will help you get to the next level, right? That could also help gauge whether your manager is also supportive of development, right? So getting very clear on what is needed from your current role to go into possibly advancement, letting your manager know, right, that you're interested in advancement and promotional opportunities, and setting up kind of that understanding and periodic and frequent check-ins to see how you're doing, getting feedback on how you're performing, where you can improve, those kind of things. So that's kind of on the job, with your having a relationship with your manager. But to your point, Louise, it's super important to have mentors and sponsors as well. So a sponsor, which you may know of, is a person who will vouch for you when you're not in the room. So if they're talking about opportunities that are opening up, or maybe future opportunities, that your sponsor will throw your name out there. So I actually didn't realize I had a sponsor, so I didn't have mentors or sponsors for a certain period of time. And I was able to get a very good promotional opportunity through my sponsor, who I didn't know was my sponsor at the time, but I learned afterward. But had I not had that sponsor, I think I wouldn't have been able to get that opportunity. And it was a great, awesome opportunity, which I mentioned during my discussion earlier, which was being an internal consultant to executives. And so he saw the potential in me, and so he, wanted me to be in that role. So having mentors, sponsors give you that feedback and kind of that help to put your name out there is tremendous when it comes to your career.
Love that. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add? I know Shannon, not sure if you want to add anything else about mentorship, Brandon. I know these are pieces we've kind of talked about, and it's something you touched on, Bernice, sort of social capital, right? And in instances where that may not necessarily be built into someone's, environment or background. How do we ask questions about mentorship programs as we're going into those interviews? not sure if there's anything you want to add, Shannon, Brandon, knowing that, Shannon, you're working in a role right now. Brandon, you're about to start at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Questions related to mentorship programs.
Should I go first, Shannon, or did you want to start? Okay. Well, there's a similar question here that's asking about mentors at U of M who really supported you and prepared you for career readiness. I would say first and foremost, your peers, making connection with your peers. If you're in a certain program, you're in that program together. And although you may not have the exact same experiences, those are definitely people that can vouch for you, that can support you. Even though I wasn't an undergrad here at U of M, I quickly made some friends and even some, now we'll soon to be coworkers that really vouched for me in the recruiting process. I would also say, not to, anyways, I would say reaching out to Louise if you're at University of Michigan or the Alumni Association. I really can't stress that enough, how much of a help she was to me in providing me the confidence and even the words or exact phrasing and preparing me for those kind of conversations to have with my companies that would give me the awareness as to whether this company will support me as a first generation professional. And I would also say, I know Bernice stressed this, but just don't be afraid to reach out to people through LinkedIn, you have Bernice as a resource here, which is already a phenomenal start, but, put yourself in a position to advance in your career. And one of the best ways to do that is just to reach out to different people, whether it's through LinkedIn, whether it's through your organization groups or programs that they may have there. And I can't stress that enough, because the conversations I had with those that I reached out to were instrumental in where I am today and where I'm headed. But yeah, I don't know, Shannon, would you like to say anything else?
I think that was great. I think the only other thing I would add, thinking about mentorship and just having folks who have some experience to share when maybe that's less available in one's family or one's immediate social circles. For me, being a student, many years at U of M, I had many different jobs and internships, mostly to financially support myself, but also those provided really great opportunities to meet folks across different fields, have different supervisors and leaders that would always be willing to answer questions, and some that, have maintained those connections over the years. Part of the reason I think I was asked to be at this event, because I know Brooke, and I used to work for the Alumni Association as one of those jobs as a student. So I think just trying to find different ways to meet mentors and people with experience that is valuable to share.
I love that, Shannon. Thank you so much. For those of you who happen to be students who are maybe navigating this transition from student to professional, there is a number of different mentorship programs here at the University of Michigan. One of them is called UCAN, which is the Career Center's mentorship platform. Please take a look at that. That could be something. What that really is a data pool of all the alumni who have come forward and said, hey, we're here to support you, our student community. You can literally go on there. It's just like LinkedIn. You can look up individuals. You can find folk who you think, hey, their profile is something that I would love to do. And you can reach out to them and schedule appointments with them to actually meet with them. So really, again, I think a lot of it comes down to Brandon's point, to taking that initiative, right, to find those resources. So Brooke can post, she's just posted the actual UCAN link as well. This is for students on the call. Or those who are about to make those transitions. Take a look at some of the mentorship programs. There's quite a number. Megan, actually, thank you, Megan. You posted the one at the university, the College of Engineering. That's another one. Awesome. All right, let's move on to some of the other questions that have come in. So one of our alums asked about this question, and maybe Bernice, this is a question for you. And you touched on this a little bit about this notion of invisible, the sort of hidden curriculum, right? This hidden curriculum that could exist in certain industries and also in certain companies. Can you talk a little bit about this hidden curriculum? How does an alum or a job seeker find out more about the hidden curriculum? And what can organizations do to make said curriculum not hidden, right? More transparent to job seekers or even staff who work at that organization?
Yeah, definitely. So I think number one, it's tapping into, again, it's almost always going back to your network, right? So if you know people that work at a company, or if you're pursuing a certain company, tapping into your network to try to find people that work there and getting kind of, the insights on the culture. But also, if you're in that organization, that's where mentors and sponsors become very important, because they're going to kind of give you that inside information to kind of help you guide around that culture, the unwritten rules, the hidden curriculum, all of that. So that's when those sort of relationships become very, very important. I would also say that joining employee resource groups or other sorts of employee groups, where that is where you're going to learn a lot of information. I know I was part of and the leader of a Latino employee resource group. And that's all we talked about, right? Is how to move up in the company, who to know, who's a good sponsor, who's a good mentor. So you're going to get really good inside information from employee resource groups if you have access to those. So there's a lot of different ways on getting that inside information, but it's really going to be going back to what Brandon said, is talking to people and taking the initiative to ask those questions. Don't be embarrassed or shy to ask those questions. Looking back, I should have asked more often, like, who's a good manager to work for? Who's a manager that supports their, employees' advancement? If I would have been asking those questions earlier on, I probably would have had some better, experiences earlier on. So do not be shy about asking those type of questions.
Thank you so much. It's really helpful. And to actually reference to your point, not being afraid of asking those questions or making that outreach. One of my colleagues actually posted a list of College of Engineering faculty and staff who've identified themselves as first-gen mentors. So that's the thing, is these resources are available, finding them and reaching out to those individuals who've already sort of stepped up and said, hey, we're here and we want to help and we want to, be able to support our students as well as our upcoming professionals with these kind of conversations. So the data is out there. We just have to find the data and then capitalize on that outreach. All right, so let's move on to some of the other questions we've gotten in our Q&A. We still have a good amount of time. So the first question, I think this question, again, maybe this is for you, Bernice, but again, Brandon and Shanna, please feel free to chime in based on your personal experience as well. So can the panelists address complexities surrounding self-describing one's starting origin and economic capital and background? For example, how do we address the problematic surrounding relative comparisons, especially considering more recent research that defines a global middle-class definition that includes a daily income that ranges to the equivalence of $5 all the way to $100. So hopefully I'm understanding this question correctly, but really there's this broad range. How do we, address those relative comparisons? And maybe this is related to the research that you conducted, Bernice, and how you went about some of these definitions.
Sure. So so one of the things we're still trying to define, because other researchers have somewhat different definitions of what a first-gen professional is, because very much to that question, there's, even if you're a first-gen professional, there's different experiences within, being a first-gen professional. So for example, myself, I grew up in Orange County, California, I think the same place where Brandon grew up. And so for me personally, I had exposure to a lot of middle class and upper class families. A lot of my friends were super, super diverse. You came from all socioeconomic backgrounds, races, everything. And so for me, I had that exposure, right, very, very early on and throughout my life. However, I've talked to other first gens where within their community, it was just mostly one ethnicity, one race, one type of socioeconomic background that, they mostly were exposed to. So even within the first gen community, there's differing experiences. So I would say that we're still trying to define what first gen professional is, but I know some companies are starting to include in their employee surveys a question that asks, are you the first in your family to attend college? So that's kind of how some companies are starting to look at first-gen professionals to see whether they are the first to go to college, because that will be indicative of maybe their parents probably, their parents did not go to college, so they're probably being defined broadly in a lot of companies now as the first to go to college, essentially.
Thank you so much. And Shannon, I know this is actually something we chatted about when we talked about the definition of first gen student, and Kessler Scholars' very sort of broad interpretation of that versus, again, I think the variation on how that definition varies. So thank you so much. All right, let's move on to the next question. As an FGP, I sometimes find it hard to take some big steps in my career. For example, pursuing a master's degree, applying for jobs, aiming for promotion, because my family doesn't have the language to check in or provide emotional support for these really big transitions. What advice do you have for someone starting these conversations within their family, or perhaps finding more of those emotional support networks for these kinds of transitions? So I don't know, I'm throwing it out there. Maybe we'll start with Shannon and Brandon before we move over to Bernice, knowing that Bernice, you had a chance to touch on some of the research. Shannon, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is a tough question. Definitely something I experienced myself, and deciding and figuring out what's best to share with family and what's best to, try to seek those other support networks. And I think for me, what was really helpful, and I think it was brought up before by Brandon, but the peer support networks, especially building connections with peers who may also be first gen or just in similar experiences where maybe their families also do not have the language, or some families don't want to engage with these type of conversations around career advancements and education. So I think really building friendships and just general peer support networks with folks like this, it really helped me to have people to bounce ideas off of, to provide support, to provide encouragement that, this is possible, like go for that application, and you're going to do well in an interview or provide interview support. So for me, the peer network ended up being the most beneficial and the most, kind of relatable and affirming.
Thank you. I really like that. And sort of, who we listen to sort of matters, right? So making sure we're surrounding ourselves with the supportive individuals who really can empower, hey, no, you're not self-deceived. You can actually accomplish that, right? So that's the career coach in me. That's, no, we can do this, right? Let's identify those strengths. Let's really speak to the future, right? In an empowering way. So really like that. Brandon, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I would just say two things. I'd say one on a more practical level is to have a plan and be able to lay it out for your family members so that they have some checkpoints as to what you plan to do. I know pursuing a master's and then your career afterwards may be somewhat broad at times. And I know the conversations I had with my parents and family wasn't as easy for them to kind of lay hold of what I was exactly doing. But when I kind of laid it out for them, I'm going to do this program, going to go to do this kind of role, then transition to this, or any kind of plan, I think that helped my family gain a better understanding of what I was doing and be able to provide the support that I needed. And along that line, I would say what my parents or family couldn't necessarily give me in terms of understanding what it's like pursuing further education and working in a business environment, they were able to provide the support I needed with very practical matters such as, finding places to live, arranging transportation when I'm here, different areas like that where they felt what was important to me was that they would still feel involved in my career and in the steps that I was taking. And what they couldn't do in what, some of these professional related items they could provide in terms of practical arrangements, even taxes and living arrangements. There are so many ways that so many things that my parents have learned since being here in America that they were able to pass on to me, and they were able to feel involved in my journey. So I would just say those are two of the ways that I gained a level of support that I wanted from my parents that maybe I couldn't, where they couldn't have given it to me in some of these other areas related to my career and professional goals.
Thank you, Brandon. Shannon, really love both the insights. Bernice, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think those were great comments. I'll just say that I was super fortunate that I was I the fifth one to go to college? I'm the youngest of 8. So there was 5 ahead of me that had already gone to college. And so I think with our family that I was fortunate that my family was super supportive and they had already gone through this 5 times. So by the time that it got around to me, they were pretty well aware of, from awareness perspective of what it meant to be a college student and transitioning to a professional. But the only thing I would add though is just to understand that social mobility or going from working class backgrounds to, professional, to becoming professional is a huge transition. It's a huge accomplishment. And for some people it brings fear, right? I know there's been some first gen that have told me that their families didn't react as supportive in a supportive manner as they had hoped, but just understand that that's just a sense of fear from change, and just, it's just something that they're not used to or something that they don't understand. And sometimes that drives a little bit of fear and overprotection. So just understand that and just be, patient with that as well. So that's all I would add.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all the insights. Loved everything we've talked about. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this next question. So Bernice, I know this is something we touched on when we were preparing, the sort of collision of various identities that someone may be experiencing. So, right, they may have a first generation experience, but then they also may be, Brandon, it's something you mentioned actually in reference to your parents, they may also be immigrants. So do you have any specific advice for those on the call who may have both of these kind of experiences, both sort of first in family to go to college, as well as first in family to, living in the US, right? So can you touch on that? And is that anything you have any insight in terms of someone who may have both experience of both of these kind of identities?
No, actually, to be honest, Louise, I don't. Our research has focused more on US-based first-gen professionals that were born and raised in the US. However, the immigrant experience is also something I know that has been out there in the research. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of insights on that. So I don't know if Brandon or Shannon have anything else to add to that.
Anything else, Brandon, you wanted to add to that experience, or good?
Well, I wasn't born outside the US. I was born inside, in the US, and my parents were both born outside the US. And I don't have much related to that question, but yeah, I'm hoping that we can in the future maybe shed some light on that as well.
Absolutely. That's again, we're here to support our alumni and all the incredible diversity and variation in which where they are and are here to support you. So reach out to us. Maybe that's a future webinar topic for us to be talking about that specific experience that our alumni have gone through. So appreciate your thoughts there. All right, let's move on to some more questions. We are nearly at the top of the hour, but we're going to try to get through as many of these as we can. So one of our alums has asked about the transition between having a peer network support system. So can you speak to how was the transition between having a peer network or support system during university to the workplace, potentially being one of the youngest or the most junior professional in a company, in addition to feeling the gaps of being a first gen? So can we talk a little bit about that specifically? And I'm not sure who wants to kick us off with that question. And I'm not sure if you would like me to even repeat it. Again, the transition from peer network to workplace and being the youngest or most junior professional in a company. Is that something you want to touch on, anyone? I'm going to throw it out to all three of you and see if we have any takers on that. Nothing so far. Okay.
I can mention something really quickly, just in terms of that transition. One of the first things I did was one of the organizations I worked for was to find a community that I can associate myself with. So the one I joined was a Hispanic focused belonging community, and I just began to reach out to the leaders in that organization, and I quickly found that not only do we have a lot of the same experiences, but they were excited that someone was reaching out to them to have these kind of conversations. So even though I was the youngest in that organization, or I was on the lowest of the totem pole in terms of hierarchy, they all the more appreciated that kind of initiative. So I would say, don't be afraid to reach out, and no matter how high or low, it seems like the people I've interacted with are more than willing to facilitate you and help you engage in these conversations that would otherwise not be brought to the forefront.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Love that advice around the FGPs and the groups that are available. I would say, actually, in terms of our programming here at the University of Michigan, we have a significant number of alumni who want to give back and support our younger alumni and our students. Sometimes actually the challenge we have is on the other side. Our alumni, at least our younger students or younger alumni, are not always the ones following up or, taking advantage of the fact that they have this phenomenal group of individuals from executives, all manner of individuals from all manner of backgrounds and identities and groups really just saying, hey, we're here, we want to help you, we're willing to help you. So, it's actually on the other side of that coin that we have that challenge in terms of some of the programming we offer. So take advantage of it if you have it. Shannon, anything else you want to add there? You're smiling and nodding. No.
Nothing else. Just, thank you so much for having me here today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we've hit the top of the hour. My clock says 1:01. We've actually haven't gotten through absolutely any, all of the questions that we received. I hope this session has been helpful to you, our alumni, our students, our colleagues, and our staff here at the University of Michigan. Please reach out to Bernice. She's done some amazing research, and I think would be more than happy to share some of her expertise with you. Bernice, Shannon, Brandon, thank you on behalf of the University of Michigan and the Alumni Association for joining us, for having this conversation about First Gen, sharing your insights around the research, Bernice. We're really grateful to you. Please look at Bernice's resources. We will be sharing the recording so you can follow through really slowly to take advantage of that in a follow-up email. So do look out for that from the Alumni Association. And I think that's it for now. Final thoughts from you, Bernice, Shannon, or Brandon, to tie this up?
I would say just please remember and don't downplay your value. You've accomplished so much, and you will accomplish so much more. Just recognize your value.
Brandon, final parting thoughts.
I'm just very thankful to participate in something like this. It means a lot to me that we would be progressing and facilitating advancements in first generation professional careers. So really thankful, and I hope that everyone is able to gain the confidence they need to go forward.
Thanks, Brandon. Shannon, any final thoughts?
Nope, just seconding what everyone said. And thanks again for hosting this. It's a great event.
Absolutely. So all I can say is I agree. All of you who are on the call, you are amazing. You're phenomenal, and go out there and take the world by storm, and reach out to us at the Alumni Career Program. We are here to help you and supply those supportive resources. All right, everybody, I'm going to be signing off. Go Blue.